Hey everyone, here is how I put together this oh so handsome little number for Henry's holiday suit, if you will. It's doubling as both Thanksgiving and Christmas this year, and I'm doing view D with that adorable little bauble. Sorry, the kids are playing in the background. I'm doing view D with that adorable bubble bottom since Henry is still little. Okay, to begin, you will have 4 collars to cut out, 2 sleeves, 1 shirt front on the fold, and I put little notches on the shirt front where those pleats are going to go. And then you'll have 2 of those shirt backs to cut out, as well as 2 bubble front bottoms and 2 bubble back bottoms. Then you will have to also cut out this waistband. Now first I took the collar and sewed on this velvet piping. I'm roughly measuring out how much piping it's going to take, and that way I can cut the seam allowance down to about 1/4 inch to make sewing it on easy. I can just match up those raw edges and move my needle over so there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance when the edge of my presser foot is in line with those raw edges. Once that was done, I put the other half of that collar right sides together and sewed around the collar again, and I sewed with those previous stitches up so I could go just inside of those suckers. And then I turned it right sides out and gave it a pressing. Once I sewed the other collar together, then I basted the 2 together at the front. And it's a good idea to baste collars together since a gap between them, I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's just it just sort of stares at you, okay? You want to avoid this gap if at all possible, so an easy way to avoid this gap is to put some wide zigzags that overlap that seam allowance area. So then I grabbed the shirt front and started to put in those pleats. As you can see, the pleats go from the middle of the shirt towards the outside, which is typical for pleats. So with right sides together, I matched up 2 of those notches on the top and the bottom of the shirt, and I give it a quick ironing, and I sew down that pleat. Now I'm working with this delightful silk Dipponione gingham, which has a built-in grid. So I'm just sort of picking a row to stop on. I'm lucking out is what I'm trying to say. If you're working with a solid fabric or whatever, you could just mark your stopping point on each pleat instead. So once I was done sewing all of those pleats, then I ironed them into place, and then I basted them down around the necklines as well as on the bottom of the shirt. And then I could put the shirt aside and move on to the shirt back. First I ironed over that facing twice and sewed that into place. And after repeating that to both sides of the back of the shirt, then I put the shirt back wrong sides together with the shirt front and joined them at the shoulder seams using French seams. And I have a detailed video on how to do French seams that is linked below. Then I based that collar onto the shirt by first matching the front of the collar with the front of the shirt. Like center collar with the center shirt is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so moving on to those sleeves. This fabric doesn't really have an apparent like right or wrong side to it, at least not to me. So I took advantage of that and I flipped up the raw edge about 1/4 inch, ironed that in place, and then flipped it up to match that little notch area of the sleeve and ironed that in place. And then I put some of this velvet in that fold and did some top stitching on top of that. And I am just loving this little treatment for boys' sleeves, and as a bonus there is no hand finishing work at the end. So then I pinned the sleeve to the shirt, and I didn't need to ease in this sleeve, it just fit, which was nice. After sewing the 2 together, then I trimmed up the sleeve to about 3/8 of an inch and ran a zigzag over top to enclose those raw edges. And finally I joined the side seams together using French seams. And then I attached the neck binding band. So I took a 2-inch wide bias strip, folded that in half, and gave it an ironing. Something that really helps me with these little bands to lay nicely into place is to iron them into the curvature before you sew them onto your garment. So if you think about it, you're asking a little bit from this, strip of bias band. Basically, the bottom needs to fit a wider diameter than the top of the band. So taking the time to iron it into shape really helps this process go smoothly. And then I just tuck the raw edges into the band at the back of the shirt and pin those into place. Then I took that to my sewing machine and carefully sewed the band into place. Just go slowly here, a little bit of time. Just put your needle down, turn your work, needle down, turn your work, just take it slow, okay? Then I put a ton of little clips around that neckline, and this allows that smaller diameter to open up to the larger diameter, which lets your fabric just kind of open up and lay nicely into place. Otherwise, you will have ripples all over this neckline and it will look like a hot mess. So I pulled out those little basting zigzags from the front of the collar, and finally I ironed this neckband down, and I'm going to sew it down by hand into place. Now, if this wasn't a fancy garment though, I would definitely sew it down by machine, but it is sewing, so you do you. After giving that area a really good ironing, then I set the shirt aside and moved on to constructing the bottom of the bubbles. First, I joined the bubble fronts together as like down that crotch seam, as well as the bubble backs. Join those together down that center crotch seam as well. And I did that for both the bubble as well as its lining. Then I joined the bubble front together with the back bubble. Oh my god, there's so many bubbles in here. At the side seams using plain seams. After ironing all of those seams open, I set the bubble bottoms aside and grabbed the waistband. And I wanted to interface this, so I grabbed some of that 2-inch wide strips of German interfacing that Farmhouse Fabric sells. It's linked below. And I just cut 2 of these lengths off since it wasn't quite as wide as I needed, but still, these strips are super convenient to use. You aren't dealing with yards of interface at a time. So anywho, I ironed those suckers down and then sewed a little bit of this piping onto the lower edge of the waistband, and then I folded the waistband onto itself and sewed it into a circle, if you will. Then I trimmed up that seam and went back to the bubble bottoms. So I matched the bottom of the bubbles together with right sides together. Then I sewed around the perimeter and trimmed up the seam and clipped those corners. Then I turned it right sides out and pushed those little corners out, and I gave everything a really, really good ironing. So then I could put that little casing in. And yes, I finally had to swap out my white thread for something more appropriate since I am going to be top stitching here. Anywho, I stitched about 3/8 of a way from the finished edge of that bottom of the bubble, like around those leg opening areas. I start about 1 1/4 inches from the crotch tab, and I stop about 1 1/4 inches from the other crotch tab. I hope all of that is making sense. So basically, the bottom of the casing is going to be that bottom seam, and what I'm currently sewing is the top of the casing. So then I cut a piece of 1/4 inch wide elastic to length, and I threaded that using a safety pin. Now I realize that cotton velvet is not the best fabric to use in this situation, but I am making it work. I just love velvet for the fall, winter time, especially for fancier occasions, so it's fine. It does work, it's just not the best, if that makes some sense. So when I've pulled the elastic through so there's only like a 1/2 inch tail of it left or so, then I take it back to my machine and I sew it down in place before continuing to push the safety pin through the other side of that casing. And once that side pops out, then I actually pin the safety pin so it's out of the way, and I sew that side of the elastic down in place. And then I ran 2 rows of gather stitches along the top of that bubble, and I'm putting in these stitches in the bubble as well as its lining. So both of the pieces of fabric are touching, and I'm putting those 2 gather stitches along the entire top. And then I can gather up the bubble and attach it to the waistband. And I sew the 2 together with the waistband facing up so I can go just inside the previous stitches, securing the piping down. I hope all of that is making sense. From there, I'm going to sew the waistband down by hand onto the inside of that bubble bottom, which will enclose all of those raw edges. It'll just become a nice, neat little package. And finally, I folded the shirt up twice so I could hem that into place. And I just hem using the machine since this hem is not going to be visible, so what's the point of hand stitching it down? The shirt actually gets tucked inside the bubble bottoms, and you can secure the 2 together using snaps or buttons or a combination of the 2. So to enclose that crotch though, I used the snap setter snaps, and there you have it. Our little man is ready for the holiday season. I hope this video was helpful. If y'all have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. And as always, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time.